Everyone. It is 3 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover today. We're very excited that you're joining us. Just a reminder, any comments, any questions can be directed to the chat or to the question and answer section so that we can answer those later on for you. Welcome to our third ADA webinar, this one focusing on inclusive course design and accessible course design. We are joined today by our experts from around the system. We have Alyssa Coates, our ADA coordinator at the system level. We have our LMS leads from Northwestern State, Ms. Emily Parrott, hello. Meredith King from UNO. Whitney Civil Sawyer from Louisiana Tech, Andrea Leonard from UL Lafayette, and then, of course, we have our wonderful interpreter, Shane, with us. So thank you so much for being here today, and I'm going to turn it over to this amazing group.
Hello, everyone. We're so glad you could join us today. Like Katie mentioned, my name is Alyssa Coates, and I work for the University of Louisiana System as the Web Accessibility Coordinator. We're excited to welcome you to our final webinar in our Accessibility Essentials series, and today we're going to focus on course design. This session pulls together everything we've been covering so far and connects directly to how students experience your courses every single day. As a quick reminder of why we're here, PPEM 74 was updated in June 2025 to align with new federal standards from the Department of Justice. PPM 74 is Louisiana's policy that ensures people with disabilities can fully access state government services online, and that includes our LMS platforms. We'll start today's webinar with an overview of Universal Design for Learning, UDL, and why it's such an important foundation for creating accessible and flexible learning environments. Next, we'll do a quick refresher on WCAG accessibility principles and how they apply in course content. After that, we'll move into some live demos in both Canvas and Moodle, where you'll see best practices for course structure, navigation, headings, discussions, quizzes, announcements. And then we'll wrap things up looking at some links, VPATs, and a quick look at UJA Panorama that can help with checking for accessibility issues in our LMS platforms. But to kick things off, I'll turn things over to Meredith King.
Hello, everyone. My name is Meredith King. I'm the Interim Director at the Center for Teaching Innovation here at the University of New Orleans. And I am going to be talking to y'all about universal design for learning and how universal design for learning ties into accessibility and all these things that we have been thinking about. So let's get started. First, what is universal design for learning? We want to know that, right? Universal design for learning is a way of designing courses so all students can learn, not just your typical student. It helps instructors plan for student differences from the start instead of reacting later. So the idea is that you're going to be designing from this place where everyone has access rather than thinking about them later, instead of fixing those barriers after they've been created mid-semester. You're going to reduce them so that they don't even happen up front. Universal design for learning makes courses easier to navigate, clearer to understand, and more welcoming for all learners. And I have a quote here from CAST, which is the organization that gives out the principles for universal design for learning, that says, "The goal of UDL is learner agency that is purposeful and reflective, resourceful and authentic, strategic, and action-oriented." And you will notice that CAST here is a link. You will be getting a version of this slide deck when you get the recording, the presentation as well. So you will be able to go and follow that link. Let's discuss why universal design, no, every time, why universal design for learning matters. So universal design for learning supports all kinds of students, right? Supports first generation students, multilingual learners, students with disabilities, busy adult learners, and anyone that might be navigating any sort of challenges or difficulties. It's really going to support all of those learners. A well-designed course works better for all students, which then reduces your workload later on. So you're upfront thinking about things and framing them from universal design so that you're reducing your workload in the at the end or in the middle of the semester when you are already going with your course. And I just have a little image here because I like to illustrate things sometimes. And this is an image of an examiner sitting behind a desk out in an open field. He's saying, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. And in front of him, you see a line of animals with a tree in the background. And you'll see there's a bird, a monkey, a penguin, an elephant, a fish in a bowl, a seal, and a dog. Obviously, not all of these animals are going to be equipped to climb that tree. So even though they're assessing equally, right, on the same playing field, it's not actually assessing them equitably. It's not universally designing so that everyone has access. There's no way for a fish in a bowl to climb a tree, so he couldn't show mastery in some other way, assuming that that fish is male. So here I have an image. It's just a screenshot of the Universal Design for Learning CAST guidelines. And again, you'll be able to go to those at udlguidelines.cast.org. Um, and you'll see there are three columns here. The green column all the way to the left says that you should design multiple means of engagement. The middle column that is purple says design multiple means of representation. And the column on the right that is blue says design multiple means of action expression. And then the rows there are access, support, and executive function. And under each of those, there are standards, there are guidelines to help you understand how to do that as the instructor and understand what that means for each of your students. I am not going to go through and click through all of these. Again, this is just a screenshot, but if you go to the website, all of this is interactive. You can click on it. You can learn more about any of these pieces that you need to as you are thinking about your design and starting to implement these pieces into your curriculum. But I did just want to show you quickly what that looks like, just to give you an idea and to show you the main three principles. Like I said, multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, multiple means of action expression. And while we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty, we are going to look at each of those three pieces. So, principle one is multiple means of engagement. Engagement asks, how do I help students want to learn this? Engagement is about motivation, relevance, and investment. Students connect with material differently, right? So some students love discussion and others prefer reflection. Some students are motivated by real world examples. They want to talk about their lived experience. And others like creative problem solving and something more theoretical. Some people thrive on collaboration and always want to work in a group, and other people, the idea of group work is horrifying to them and they want to do work individually. And so UDL encourages giving students different paths to become interested and stay invested in that learning. When we give them those multiple means of engagement, we are making sure that we are designing for all students so all students can want to do our coursework. Principle two is multiple means of representation. Representation asks, can students access and understand the material no matter how they learn best? So representation is about how content is presented. So students don't all absorb information the same way. You want to offer more than one format, again, to design universally and help everyone. And a lot of these are those same accessibility pieces that we have been talking about in previous webinars and will continue to be talking about. right? So you need to provide visuals, but then you also want to provide text. That's not just saying alt text, that's saying different versions of that representation, though you do need alt text on your visuals as well. You want to think about things like using charts, diagrams, as well as summaries and examples, right? A visual one and a written one. Again, visual things need alt text. And then obviously you need to include captions, transcripts, or simplified explanations when appropriate. And that's not just for accessibility, though obviously that is the law and we do need to do that. But it also ensures that students can choose the version of the material that works best for them, even if they do not need that version. It is about giving them that choice, those multiple means. And then principle three, multiple means of action and expression. Action and expression asks, can students show mastery in more than one way? Action and expression is about how students demonstrate learning. So one single assessment format rarely captures everyone's strengths. When possible, Universal Design for Learning recommends giving options. You can give a paper or a presentation. You can give a recorded explanation or a written one. You can do a diagram, model, short essay, or other medium. And that doesn't have to be multiple options in every single assessment either. Those can just be different types of assessments throughout the semester to give everyone a chance to show their strengths and their form of expression. And that flexibility helps students show mastery without being limited by one mode of expression, right? You want to make sure that you're giving them multiple means. An important thing to remember when you're thinking about all of this is that variability is normal. In any classroom, let's just think of some of the ways that students differ, and you can put some more in the chat. I'd love some engagement on that. But some of the ways that I can think of quickly that they can differ in language background, in reading speed, in attention needs, in their how comfortable they are with technology, in their prior knowledge of the subject, or in their work schedules or outside responsibilities. And we need to not think of these differences as particular outliers. It is not that these students are varying from the norm. The norm is variability. And we need to keep that in mind as we are designing. So universal design starts with the assumption that diversity is the norm. So courses need to be flexible enough to serve many types of learners. Accessibility really comes first in universal design for learning. As you can imagine, if we are trying to design courses that are universal for everyone, then they need to be accessible. And if you're designing from a framework of universal design for learning, if you're designing with universal design for learning in mind, accessibility will become second nature. And I know that sometimes that sounds like I'm selling you something. I promise I do this. I started doing this, and it really, really does help my practice as I think about designing from that universal design place rather than trying to backfill accessibility. So think about it this way, right? If documents aren't readable, or videos lack captions, or navigation is confusing, students are blocked before they begin. And that's more than wanting to fix this for just the legal reasons. Yes, we have to make sure that we are in legal compliance. That is why we're doing these webinars now. But as you are thinking about why all of this exists, it's so that we can give access to our students. And so when we're using that framework and thinking from that framework, it means that accessibility is just going to flow from it. Accessibility ensures the foundation for universal design for learning, make sure it's solid so that every student, every single student can participate meaningfully from day one. Right, because universal design and accessible design, they reduce accommodation needs later. When a course is flexible and accessible from the start, fewer students require individual accommodations. So there's going to be less scrambling mid-semester, less retrofitting of inaccessible materials, and a smoother experience for you, the instructor, and then more independence and confidence for students. Now, this doesn't mean that you're not going to get those accommodation notices saying, the Office of Accessibility has sent someone and these are the accommodations that they mean. It just means that you're going to be prepared. Lots of those, you get them and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to make sure my course material fits this? That's not what we're going to be doing, right? We're going to be making sure from the start. So there isn't even a single moment where someone finds your course inaccessible. Even with those notices, you are ready. You are on top of it. You are designing from a framework of accessibility. So they don't replace accommodations, UDL and accessible design. They don't replace accommodation, but they greatly reduce that need for those one-off fixes and that panic that you feel with it, where you don't exactly know what you're supposed to be doing or how you're supposed to fix it. You're going to have figured that out in advance, designing from that place of universal design. Let's talk about how UDL connects to accessibility standards, right? We're all here for those accessibility standards. So UDL and accessibility, they really aren't separate ideas. As we've talked about, they reinforce each other. WCAG's core principles describe what accessible content must be, and those principles are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So when we're thinking about that in terms of accessibility, we can think about that like perceivable, students can see and hear the content. Operable, students can navigate and interact with it. Understandable, students can follow instructions and layout. And robust, the content works across technologies and assistive tools. So universal design for learning and these core principles work together to ensure that all students can learn effectively. And you can think about it like this. UDL can provide the instructional structure, and core, you can think about those as the technical structure. So those are going to work together. Let's think about our core overview for course design, right? So like that's the big idea, but what does that actually mean when we're thinking about it? So perceivable, our P from POUR, that means you're thinking about things like structure, headings, contrast, alt text, captions, audio descriptions, all those things that we've talked about in previous webinars. Those are those things that you're thinking about in perceivable. You're thinking about operable, our O, that's keyboard access, avoiding things that are only drag and drop and require a mouse and a visual. You need to make sure, again, that keyboard access. Clear navigation pathways so that students who are using screen readers or assistive technologies can move through in a clear pathway, and avoiding unexpected new tabs or new windows without notifying students. Are you understandable? That's going to mean predictable pattern. You want to have predictable patterns. You want to have clear instructions, consistent naming conventions, and transparent link behavior. And then our R for robust, you want to make sure there's assistive technology compatibility. You want to have a voluntary product accessibility template, VPAT informed tool selection, and you want to avoid inaccessible LTIs or plugins. Now, if you saw voluntary product accessibility template and we're like, what is that? I don't even know how to look at that. I promise we're going to be going over that in just a little bit, so you don't need to worry about it. We're going to go over it in detail. This is just a little overview to help you start to think about it. And with that, we can get into our live demos. I'm going to pass this over to Whitney, and she's going to start to show you how you can think about some of these principles of course design within your course in your LMS.
Thank you so much, Meredith. Okay, so we are going to take those core principles and actually apply them. And before we do that, I want to start out with some subpar examples that kind of mirror some things we've already seen in the learning management system before we start applying UDL principles. So the first one I have is an improper module, and in this one you can see that there is no organizational method. So our students have no way of knowing what's content, what are assessments, how they're supposed to navigate through the module. It's all just thrown in there in one big chunk. So it doesn't have a name, but it could be something as general as Module 1 with no other extra name. So the content is not apparent to the students and they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. So that is very hard to navigate. So we're going to avoid that. Another example is siloed modules, and I've seen this a lot where people will silo their content. So all their PowerPoints are together, and then all their discussion boards are together, and then all of their quizzes or exams are together. And so that's a siloed method, and that makes it very hard for the students to navigate through the course. So it's a lot easier if you set it up in a modular method. With predictability built into it. So let's look at some predictable structures here. So I always start with a module 0, start here. So this is the beginning of the term. And this tells the students what they're supposed to do inside the class. So read the items of this module to begin, and then here are their activities they're going to complete. Now, that is the Start Here module. It is a little different than the other modules, which follow a consistent format throughout, but they still use some of that organizational structure too. So module 1 is Intro to UDL. I always start with a module overview. So this is where you're introducing your students to the content, and then you're also going to tell them where you're going to assess their learning. And then I use text headers in Canvas to organize within the module. So you'll see here materials, activities, and assessments. So my materials are my content, anything I'm going to present to my students where they're going to learn. So that could be a Canvas page, that could be a PowerPoint, that could be a PDF, it could be an Excel file, anything like that. My activities are learning activities that they're going to complete. Usually these are less low stakes. And then assessments are more like my quizzes and exams. And then I always include a wrap up, basically, where I am going over what they just learned and then connecting what they just learned to what they're about to learn in the next module. So I make sure to use very explicit naming conventions throughout. So module 1, introduction to UDL, module 1, overview. I always use materials, activities, assessments, and I always tell them what it is. Module 1 assignment, module 1 discussion, module 1 quiz. And so you can see I follow that exact same format all throughout. So, another thing that Meredith mentioned was navigation within the course. So this is your course navigation menu inside of Canvas. I highly suggest that you drill down through the settings option. You go in and you hide everything you don't want your students to go to, because that's going to keep them on track and they won't get lost in a rabbit hole inside your class. So for me, because I want my students to go to my modules, because that is the best practices, I hide things like discussions, pages, quizzes, assignments. I don't want students going into the assignments tab to locate the assignment. I want them to go into the module where it is near the content, where they learned the thing. So you can see that I've got most of those things turned off. And so I limit what they can see. And then also there are breadcrumbs built into the Canvas. So you'll see right here, this is the name of the course. This is the type of the thing. So I'm looking at pages, and this is the title of my page. And so I can go use those breadcrumbs to work my way back through the course if I need to. Another important thing I want to talk about is that Meredith hit on briefly, but hierarchy structure inside of Canvas pages. So when I say that, I mean the actual headings. So you can see here that I use headings because headings are what the screen reader works its way through. This same structure applies to things like Word documents, PDFs. So they're going to use heading structures, that hierarchical structure, to work their way through whatever the screen reader is reading. So if I go in here, I'm going to hit edit real quick just to show you. This is the page title is always going to be heading 1. And then this is my heading 2 within the class. So that is my first heading that I have. Hold on, let me get this fixed up. And then these are heading threes. So they are correctly nested. That way the screen reader knows it's going to read module one overview. And if the person who is working their way through it wants to read inside of that, it'll open up the page and then they'll see overview for module one, and then they'll start working their way through the other headings. So nesting your headings properly is incredibly important. Again, it retains that structure for the screen reader. Another thing that I want to discuss is the need for meaningful links. So when you are putting a hyperlink anywhere within the learning management system, whether it be in the rich content editor or well, basically anywhere, you want to use descriptive text. So you want to tell the user what they're going to find when they follow that link. So right here, my students, if they follow this link, they're going to find the page that's titled Start Here, Welcome. And then if they follow this link, they're going to come to Meet Your Instructor. So those are examples of using descriptive text to for the screen reader so that the end user knows exactly where they're heading if they decide to go into that link. So also, one final note is chunking your pages so that you avoid excessive scrolling, because there's nothing more frustrating than having to go way down a page to find what you need to. So this is my home page inside of Canvas, and right here under course resources where I was showing you descriptive links, these are actually other pages. So instead of having a full module with all these things in there where they have to go through the module, I've created a home page and then I use that linking within Canvas with descriptive text to chunk my pages. And now I have done my demo and we're going to give you a peek into Moodle with Andrea.
Hello, everybody. So let's take a look at Moodle right now. We're going to look at some of the same stuff we saw in Canvas, starting with the examples to avoid. This is sort of our skin on top of our Moodle instance. Your Moodle instance might look a little bit different, have things in slightly different locations, but it's to get the general look and feel of Moodle. So again, we'd like to avoid unpredictable design, right? We'd like to avoid calling things like homework due Saturday, don't forget in all caps. And I don't know what that means because which Saturday? There are so many of them. Or discussion forums to help with the first quiz, but the first quiz happened already. So these kinds of organization is not really the best for students to facilitate their understanding. Other ways that Winnie talked about include siloing things like putting all your discussion forums in one module or putting all of your quizzes in one module. We'd like to avoid that and go with a more logical, sort of top-down feed-like approach to organizing our modules. So that's what I've got down here at the bottom. Starting with some predictability, we do like to start our courses off with a getting started module that provides all of the information about getting started in the class, the syllabus, the expectations, that sort of thing. And I can place embedded videos into this area. I like to do that as an introduction, a way to engage the students. Then when I move to module one, notice that I'm using a good title for my module. Some people like to give more information, some less, but something above and beyond just module one is very helpful. Within module one, you can see I've got my intro video at the top, followed by my objectives and a checklist for all the activities in this module. I've got my instructional materials. Now, this label right here, in the older version of Moodle, it used to be called a label. In the newer version of Moodle, it's called a text and media area. So I've just made one there, and I've used heading styles to make the font easier to read and more noticeable than just regular font. And we'll talk about heading styles in Moodle in a second. All of my instructional materials are here, including my summary, and under that I have listed my assessments, and then I have an assessment entitled Module 1 Forum. And the key that I'm trying to call to your attention is I want to be predictable. So I want Module 2 to have the same general format, right? I start with an intro video embedded. I've got my objectives, my list of all of the instructional materials, and then my assessment. And I've named the assessment Module 2 Forum. I could definitely go into more detail about what the forum is about, give it a more descriptive name, but I would just need to be consistent. If I'm going to have a descriptive name for Forum 2, I have to have a descriptive name for Forum 1 and for Forum 3, etc., throughout the class. Just making sure I am following a pattern that students can recognize and pick up on and understand how the course works. So that is our module structure and our naming conventions. I'd like to talk about navigation and breadcrumbs now. Within one Moodle course, you can have breadcrumbs to where that course lives. Typically, you'll see like your courses or your dashboard in this breadcrumb trail here. As I move through the course, if I click on any item, let's click on an item. I will see that that item appears in the breadcrumb trail. So this is the item I'm on, Course Etiquette Rules. It's in module Getting Started in the course that I'm in now. So that breadcrumb trail helps everyone to locate where they are in the course. Another way to help move around the courses in Moodle is the ability to pop open and closed all of these modules. So up here, I can say collapse all, and that will close every module, or I can say expand all, and that will open every module. But that does lead me to need to scroll around a lot. So I like to collapse all and just move from one module at a time. But the students have the choice to do that, and that's important, is giving options. The next thing to talk about would be heading hierarchy. So let's go back into that example link about netiquette rules. You can see here that I have not used heading hierarchy, nor have I changed font sizes. So this might be more difficult to read, and especially difficult if I'm using a screen reader and it can't tell me what's a heading and what is not. So I'll use heading styles, but I want to point out that at the top of this page, the title of the page, Course Etiquette Rules, that is heading style 1, as Whitney just said, but in Moodle, they don't call it that. They call it headings large, medium, and small. So the title of the page is heading large. Therefore, I want to go with heading small next. So when I click on settings, I can pick any piece, highlight it, and say, this is my heading small. See how heading large is in a different color? So this is my heading medium. And then if I have another subheading, I would go with heading small next. Exactly how I would do in a document or a Word file. I would not want to make etiquette heading small and then make the next heading medium, because that doesn't successfully nest the headings. And the screen reader is going to tell students that the smaller one is sort of a subheading and the medium one is just a subheading. It'll get the order of things incorrect. So I want to be very clear about this is a medium heading. This is under that, it's a small heading. And then I can move on to my next heading. And just quickly, regular text would be considered a paragraph in this method. So when I click Save and Display, you can see that now the different sections of my content are easier to sort of parse through and understand what each piece of text is going to mean in an organizational system. As far as meaningful links are concerned, of course, we want the different links in our course to be successfully named, as we said in the examples, to avoid, we don't want to call things YouTube watch this, because I don't know what that means. What is this YouTube video you want me to watch? So instead, I'd rather say a definition of online terms. That's a clear description of what someone will go to when they click on this link. If I'm going to make hyperlinks out to outside sources, I can come down here for some good examples. All of my hyperlinks should be named appropriately to where the student would go if they click on this link. I don't want to say, click here, and then not provide any context for that. Now, this is a great example of avoiding excessive scrolling. So we kind of saw earlier that I can take the modules and open them or close them to avoid excessive scrolling. But I can also do things like, if you look at the size of some of these modules, there's a lot of instructional material. And if I keep adding more instructional material, it might take several scrolls for a student to get from the top of one module to the bottom of one module. And that's too much. So I'd like to kind of chunk out the material a little bit and make it more compact. A page tool is a good way to do that if you want to share URL links. These URLs are not the Moodle URL tool, they're just hyperlinked text, which I can do in Moodle very easily, and I like to use a page to organize those. If I need actual text itself that I want to organize and chunk out more, one tool that's optional is the Moodle Book tool. It essentially gives us text on a page, which they call a chapter, text on a chapter, and it gives me a table of contents of all the available chapters here on the left-hand side. To move from one piece of text to another piece, one chapter to another, I can click the Next button in the upper right-hand corner, or I can just click on the chapter title that appeals to me the most, and I'll get there. So that's another way of processing this content. A third method of processing content and making it easier to navigate is the Moodle folder tool. Again, instead of linking document after document after document, making the scroll a little longer, I can click on the folder tool and use it to give a bunch of PowerPoint files, for example, to a student all in one go. And the student can even download the entire folder at once. They don't have to download each individual PowerPoint file. So those are effective ways of chunking our pages. And I believe that that is the end of my portion, and I'll turn it back over to Whitney.
Okay, thank you so much. Um, I'm going to talk now about accessible interactions. So the meat and potatoes, when we're actually dealing with our students and we are interacting with them, assessing their learning, things like that. So the first thing we're going to look at is discussion boards. In Canvas, they are called discussions. So I'm going to click on one here and I'm going to go in to edit it. And again, we use that same clear structure with the heading. So this is the heading 1, here's a heading 2, and here is a heading 3. So I have my heading structure correctly set up in here. And then when I look at it, like Andrea said, it looks better, it's chunked better, so it's easier to go through. But also, one thing you can do that makes these much more interactive and useful is to give students alternate means of expression. So let students decide, do they want to do a written response? Would they want to do a video, possibly an audio clip? So you can assess learning on a rubric even, the exact same thing, but expressed in different means. So give your students that opportunity and that choice. Avoid forced video only interactions though, because some students are just not comfortable with video format. And so we suggest that you do give alternative options, but don't force them into video only. And one final comment on discussion boards is give some time for processing. So Canvas is a little bit different than Moodle. It does allow you to do different due dates. So you can have an original due date for the original response and then a reply due date. Give students enough time because discussions are about reflection, right? Give them enough time to actually go through other people's posts and come up with meaningful replies. So avoid those forced, really quick responses because they're not going to be as reflective and as useful. Next, we are going to look at quizzes. So Canvas gives you an option of classic quizzes or new quizzes, depending if that's turned on in your version. This is a new quiz, so I'm going to click in here. One thing I want to point out in new quizzes is the question types. So new quizzes has more question types than classic, and they're continuing Canvases to build in new question types all the time. So when you're designing a quiz, keep accessibility in mind. You need to avoid question types that are not accessible with a screen reader. So in Canvas, that would be a hotspot question, a stimulus question, categorization, or image-based questions. So there are alternatives. It might take you a little bit of thinking and trying to work with them out, but there are alternatives built in here to avoid those inaccessible formats. Ensure you also have very clear instructions. Make sure your students know what they're supposed to do, how long they're going to have to complete the quiz, what you're actually assessing their learning, how you're assessing their learning. Maybe you're using a rubric with a quiz. So make sure you're very straightforward and apparent and succinct too in what you're saying so the students get the instructions and are able to process them. And also, on a final note about quizzes, keep in mind that keyboard operability we've been talking about this whole time. Some question types are easier to use with a keyboard than others. So the easiest ones are multiple choice, multiple answer, true, false, and fill in the blank. So keep those in mind when you are designing your quizzes. And finally, one thing I want to show you is announcements. So announcements are a great way to communicate with our students, especially if you're teaching in an online environment, which anybody using the LMS is in some form or fashion. So announcements are a great way to reach out and talk to our students. In Canvas, each user has the ability to update notifications of anything out of the system, including announcements, meaning they have the ability to turn off emails saying, hey, your teacher pushed out an announcement. So when I use announcements in my class, I have a verbiage on the front homepage that says I utilize announcements. It's your responsibility to turn them on. So just keep that in mind with Canvas. It is a little ticky thing. But with announcements, try to keep a consistent format. So for us, we did who, what, when, where, and why. So this tells them everything they need to know. And again, when you are doing consistent formatting, they know what to expect. And with these, also, you need to consider those headings and that hierarchical structure. And you want the screen reader to read through it correctly. So I'm going to turn this back over so we can look at Moodle.
Sounds great. So coming back over to Moodle, let's start with discussion boards. In Moodle, discussion boards are called forums, which is a slightly different name. Where's the first one I wanted to pull up? Here he goes. And I wanted to talk about some of the things that we can and can't do. In Moodle, we cannot set up a due date for both the initial response and the reply response. We can just set up one due date, sadly. But again, it's a very good point that when he said, let's try not to have both the initial and reply post due at the exact same time, because then students don't have time to read other students' posts and reflect on those because they're so busy just trying to complete it before the all-in-one due date. As you can see in the description area of this forum, the title is heading large, so I want to use heading medium for my next heading, which I have here. And I've clearly identified what are the requirements for the initial post, including giving a rubric or point value system. Here, I've just used a simple grading guide. This is a really simple view of a forum, but feel free to add a rubric if you'd like to help your students really understand your expectations and what they're going to be graded on. As far as what types of responses students can give, when they're going to add a discussion, I've typed in some sample text. They can type in the text here, but you'll notice that they don't have any buttons like we saw in Canvas to change the size of the font, the color of the font type. They can't change any of those things. That's kind of locked down. All they can do is use heading styles or bold or italics, and that's pretty much it. Um, if you would like to encourage students to respond in more than one modality, such as text and audio or text and video, Moodle does offer these two little buttons here to record just audio. We can start recording inside Moodle, or video. We can start recording inside Moodle, but unfortunately, the recordings made in that fashion will not have the ability to have automatic captions on them. So that would be an accessibility issue if students were being forced to watch other students' videos or listen to other students' content when they actually physically cannot. And there is no remediation around that. So for that reason, I would recommend using a separate tool. At UL, we have Panopto, but other schools might have other tools that have automatic captioning included with them so that students can use those tools and either embed or place the link to their responses here. It's just a matter of controlling, allowing them to use multiple formats and providing instructions for the use of those multiple formats as you see fit. Um, so that's our discussion board discussion. Let's talk about quizzes next. And again, I'm using my breadcrumb trail as up here, as you can see. It's very handy to have. Coming down to quizzes, there are some things that are automatically populated in a Moodle quiz and some things that are not. So as a student, when I click on a quiz, the time the quiz opens and closes is automatically displayed. I don't have to add that text, as well as the number of attempts, the amount of time allowed per attempt. The grading method, is it the highest grade or is it an average of the two grades? And what grade the students would need to pass. That information is automatically put in this area when a student attempts a quiz. That's pretty nice. But if I want to add anything else, such as here are the learning objectives that we're going to cover, you're allowed to use your periodic table because I teach a lot of chemistry. You're allowed to use your periodic table when you take this quiz. Those kind of things I would have to enter in separately. That's not going to be automatically filled in for me. Yes, absolutely. Quizzes in Moodle do have quiz question types that are inaccessible, unfortunately, just like we saw in Canvas. So I can look at the question bank real quick, and here's our list of different question types. There's so many of them. But for us, it's drag and drop onto image and drag and drop markers. Those are the two that have been verified by Moodle as not accessible for keyboard use. I have got drag and drop onto text working with keyboard use. So I've seen that work. If I ask AI always tells me that drag and drop onto text does not work, but it does. But these are the two that are definitely guaranteed not to function properly. So we would recommend instead choosing the more common multiple choice, true, false, matching, short answer, those kinds of things, which are really easy to navigate with a keyboard if someone is using different styles of navigation online. We want to make sure we have clear instructions, but luckily all the clear instructions are typically already added. And that is pretty much all I think I had to say about quizzes. So it's time to move on to the announcements. We do not have that side menu as we saw in the Canvas course. The side menu is really blocks that I can choose to add or subtract, but I don't have that here are the grades and here are the discussion forums type of navigation and here are the announcements. So instead, at the very topmost module of all Moodle courses, an announcements forum will automatically populate. And if you've imported a class several semesters, you may have a collection of old announcements forms from previous semesters because they always copy and they add a new one every time. But in our announcements forum, this is a great way. All students in the class are automatically subscribed to the announcements forum. So any email, any message that you put in here will be sent out by email to the students. You don't have to opt in on that. And within it, we're going to try to use these heading styles again to really help organize our thoughts within the announcement. We don't want to come out with vague words like, don't forget about the test Tuesday, and that's all we tell them. We want to be very clear and say, hey, look, these are things that are coming up. Here are the due dates you might need to know about. Here's the introduction into this module. Provide some more information about why it might be important to them. And remind them about your availability as an instructor because they might have a question and want to send you an email and then they have to go back to the syllabus and find your email address. Nah, just provide their email address right here, really help them to find you in an easier fashion. And as long as we're predictable, if all of the announcements are going to have the same generalized format, then students kind of know where to look in your announcement to get the most important information, which is great for communication. And I believe that is the end for me. So I'm going to turn this over to, I believe it's Emily next.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. We are going to be talking about accessible link behavior first. Get that going. Okay, so we're talking about accessible link behavior in the LMS. What are the best practices for that? And just as a general overview, stepping back, there are variations of these, but really two main choices for link behavior. One is that the link will open in the same window. That student is in the LMS and they click on the link and it opens in the same tab or the same window as their course page. Now, if you do that, the student does have to click the back button to get back to the course. We also have open a new window or tab, and that enables a user to be able to close the new tab, and then they don't lose their place within the course. Now, our advice previously, and I think all of us LMS people agreed earlier, has been open in a new window or tab, because that enables you to, the student won't accidentally close out of their course and get lost that way. However, it turns out that the most accessible choice is actually going to be open in the same tab or window. But what you absolutely do not want to do is to send a student to a new window without any warning up front. So if you do choose to open links in new windows, add next to your text link, open in new window, the words open in new window in parentheses next to your descriptive link. And then finally, the most important thing is going to be for you to be consistent. Don't choose different types of link behaviors just willy-nilly within a module. You want students to be able to predict what is going to happen when they go to certain areas of your course. Now, the reason that open in the same tab or window is most accessible relates back to WCAG Standard 3.2, which says that we need to make sure that web pages appear and operate in predictable ways. And for a student who is navigating exclusively with a screen reader, it can be disorienting to be thrust onto a new window without any prior warning. Sometimes open a new window is the best option regardless. And that is going to be in a situation where you are asking the student to use the information on that page to do something in the LMS. You have some type of activity and you want them to be able to reference both of those things at the same time. So here's what that's going to look like in practice in Moodle. So in Moodle, you have a couple of different places that we can place links. As Andrea and Whitney showed earlier, we can put links on pages. Now, when you click the link function in Moodle to put a link on a page, you have that text to display, and that's where you're going to have your descriptive text. And then you're going to be able to enter the URL. Now, by the default, these links are going to open in the same window or tab, but you do have the option to click open in new window on this page. The other place that we can add links in Moodle is using a URL resource. Now, we have, at least at NSU, we have several options here that I haven't necessarily highlighted. Automatic opens the link on another page. So the student has to click, another page screen opens, and the student has to click twice. Generally, we advise you to avoid that option. Embed will keep the link in the window of the module, but it only works in very specific contexts. So it works really well if you're using like a YouTube video. And then in pop-up, I think we're not going to recommend that. I mean, that's going to open in a new window without menus. And it's probably, if we're talking about being disoriented by a screen reader, that's probably going to be the most disoriented option. So in this menu, if you want to open in the same window, your option is open. That's what you're going to choose. If you wanted to open in a new window, you would choose new window. And we'll recommend that you stick with one of those two options. So if you create a URL resource that opens in a new window, this is what that's going to look like. You're going to have your descriptive link, and you're going to type opens in new window next to that descriptive link. And then under appearance, you would choose new window if that is the behavior that you prefer. Canvas is very similar. So when you add an external link to Canvas, notice they say new tab instead of new window, but same thing. In Canvas, the default is to load in the same window. You have to actually click to choose to open in a new tab. Now, Canvas and some links in Canvas may not open in the Canvas tab. So the advice is to be sure after you've added links to click and check. And honestly, that's advice that you should follow regardless of where you're adding a link in any situation. It's always best to go back, click on that link, and verify that that link indeed does go where you intend for it to go. So in summary, the most accessible choice for link behavior is going to be to open in the same window or tab for most items. If you choose open in new tab or window, be sure to add that text, open in new window next to your link text to warn users that they are about to be moved into a new area. And whatever you choose to do, the best design advice is still going to be as consistent as possible. So decide which way you want to go overall for most of your links and try to be and be consistent throughout your modules. The next topic we're going to talk about is how to choose accessible applications. And this is where we're going to get a little bit into what a VPAT is and what that might look like. So just in general, we know, if you've been with us this semester so far, that all applications that you choose to include in your course need to meet compliance standards, and that is defined as meeting WCAG 2.1 AA standards. So whenever you are looking at new applications to include in your course, just know that each university is going to have their own set of procedures. Some universities may already have a place where you can look at approved and unapproved software lists. Some universities may be collecting repositories of compliance information. If you're talking about resources that are already adopted by the school, then your IT department and others are already working on evaluating and ensuring that all of that is as compliant as possible. Now, not all applications that end up being incorporated into a course go through formal purchase processes. And this is why we think it is important for you to kind of understand the basics of this at least, so that you can make informed decisions and know when to involve IT or others in the choices that you're making. So if you're starting with something new, or if you're just curious about something that you're already using in a course, the first thing you can do is to Google the vendor name and add the word accessibility. And 9 times out of 10, that's going to bring up the accessibility statement for that particular vendor. And those accessibility statements vary in terms of how specific or helpful they are, but that can give you a first look into how that company is dealing with accessibility. The next step is going to be to find or request the Accessibility Conformance Report, or VPAT. Some vendors put all of this out on their public website. Some vendors will give you an email address to request the Accessibility Conformance Report for the piece of software that you are evaluating. You're going to want to make sure to read and evaluate those reports. Obviously, that can be done in collaboration with your IT staff. And if possible, conduct tests before adopting the product. Institutions should also include accessibility assurance and vendor contracts. That is going to be something that your purchasing department or your IT department is going to be handling. But again, there are some things that professors include in their classes that don't necessarily go through these formal processes. But regardless, you can pass the information that you gather on to your IT support for assistance with a final decision, if you need someone else to look at the accessibility report, for example. So backing up a bit to some general definitions. Remember, WCAG, W-C-A-G, is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Those are the standards that we want to meet. An accessibility statement is a public document that describes the organization's commitment to making digital content, products, and services accessible to people with disabilities. And then we have the terms VPAT, which stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, and ACR, which stands for Accessibility Conformance Report. Now, technically, the VPAT is the blank document that it's the generic blank document that has been prepared by the organizations that govern these standards. Okay, but once a vendor has filled in all the blanks, that is actually referred to as the accessibility conformance report. But in practice, a lot of people just call it all a VPAT, and that's fine. But just know that if a vendor gives you the accessibility conformance report, that is in fact what you are asking for. So in general, a VPAT is going to have a list of all the WCAG standards or whatever other standards have been included. And then it's going to list the levels of achievement of each standard. And there are standard ways to label the levels. You have supports, which means fully compliant, partially supports, which means that the vendor is aware that there are some places where this particular standard is not met, and that should be described in detail on the report. Does not support means that the application doesn't meet a standard at all, and then not applicable means that they don't think the standard applies to that particular program. And that might be an example of that might be, includes accurate closed captioning, but the product doesn't have any video. So in that case, that standard would not be applicable to that particular product. Some things you want to look for. You want to see who completed the report. Did the vendor complete the report themselves, or did they have an outside service come in and evaluate their product? What technologies did they use to test the software? So we're looking for specific browsers, screen readers, etc. That will all be listed. What standards are not supported? If they have some that say do not support, how would those unmet standards actually impact one of your users? How important is that to your particular population? And you're going to want to look to see if there is a timeline for remediation to meet any unmet standards. So here's an example of an accessibility conformance report. This is Pearson VitalSource Bookshelf. Pearson was one of the vendors that has extremely detailed accessibility information available on their public site. And so when we're looking at this, we can see that the version of the VPAT that was used, this is actually not the absolute latest version, I don't believe, but you can also see that this report was completed in January 2024. We have contact information if we want to ask questions about anything that we see in this report. And then under evaluation methods used, we can see that they did use an outside agency to review their product. They used TPGI. And then you see the methodology that was used. There was some manual testing and some automated testing. And that's what you want to see. You want to see both. You want to see that manual testing is used. And then it tells you specifically what did we test in. So here they've tested in Google Chrome, they've tested in Safari, they've used these assistive technologies, and then the automated tools that they used are these that are listed here. And then furthermore, it's going to tell you exactly which standards you're going to see in this report. Now, when you go down the report, you're going to start seeing the criteria. And if you've been looking at WCAG standards at all, you'll notice that they list the specific standard. And generally, these are going to be divided with level A standards together in a section and then level AA standards in this section. And sometimes AAA standards aren't included at all, but if they are, they're going to be in a third section. And we're looking at this specific report for Pearson VitalSource Bookshelf, which is an online textbook reader or provider. You'll see that 1.1.1 non-text content, your alternate text, is only partially supported. And in the remark, it says that book content is out of scope. So in other words, what they're saying here is that the content of their frame of their application does have alternate text. But if you're talking about actual pages of text in that textbook, that is up to individual publishers. So if you are trying to make a decision for about this particular situation, you might need to take another step. You might need to actually find the publisher of the specific book that you are looking at to make sure that that criteria is met for that specific publisher. And then in this case, audio only and video only is not applicable because there is no audio or video content within this particular application. So when you're, generally speaking, when you're looking at one of these documents, red flags, an inaccurate or unclear description of the product, or some things on the report that don't seem to accurately represent features that you know are there. So you kind of want to look for that if you know the product well. If everything on the report says supports with no real detail. I mean, you could be looking at a mature application that has gone through many iterations, and they actually do support every single standard. But if it does say supports all the way down, you do need to take a closer look and just make sure that that is actually accurate. If a tool hasn't been tested with screen readers, you probably want to avoid that. If there is no mention of keyboard navigation in their testing, you're going to want to avoid that. If the report is more than a year old or not dated. Now, in some cases, you're going to have an application that really hasn't been updated in that period of time, but that's a question that you can ask your representative for that particular piece of software, or why is this one so old? Why don't we have a more up-to-date version? You want to make sure that if there are features that don't meet standards, that there is a timeline for updating those. And it's possibly a red flag if the report was done internally by the vendor themselves rather than an outside source. If it was done internally, you want to take a closer look at it. Green flags include that the report was completed by an external reviewer, that it's recent, that they're not all supports without adequate descriptions, and that if there are places where remediation is needed, there is a timeline provided for getting that done. So what happens if you are reviewing a new application and there are some standards that aren't met? Okay, so if you still want to use this, then a timeline will need to be developed for updates. And you can, I mean, obviously you're working with your IT department on all of this. The contract would need to be updated to reflect the expectations for those updates to occur. And if that unmet standard is going to cause potentially an issue for a student, then you need to have an alternative in place for meeting the needs of those students. So in summary, you're going to want to work with your IT and purchasing departments at your schools to make decisions about adoptions of new applications. You can take the steps to acquire the vendor documentation. If you're working with a rep and you're trying to evaluate something, you absolutely can ask that rep to send you the VPAT or accessibility conformance report. It's helpful for you to kind of understand the basics of how to evaluate this documentation, know what you're looking at. And if at all possible, try to do some testing prior to purchase or adoption of brand new resources. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Whitney to do a UJA panorama demonstration.
Thank you so much. We are going to jump right back into my demo class that we used earlier. So UJA Panorama is an accessibility tool that we have acquired as the ULS has acquired. Most schools within the ULS have acquired it. They're somewhere in that process right now. So if you don't have it yet and you are at a ULS school, chances are it is coming soon. It does work in both Canvas and Moodle. What I'm going to do is demo it in Canvas, but it's the exact same features in both. So one thing I do want to point out before I even get started and showing you what it does is tell you up front what it does not do. It does not check for closed captions, audio descriptions, anything like that inside of multimedia. So this is mostly files. pages, HTML pages, PDFs, things like that. So if you have a video, you're going to need that to be checked in a different system, like Panopto or Canvas Studio has in captions, closed captions too. So anyway, let's go ahead and check it out. You have Use Your Panorama right here in course navigation that you can enable if it is turned on at your school. So I am going to go in this way and show you the dashboard. Now I am the LMS admin, so I have more rights here. So what I've done is drilled down to the course dashboard. So you will have a course report for every class you have, and you can see right here that my accessibility score overall is 94%, that it's processed 38 files, and that it's improved 11. So I can go down here and see what types of files I have and what it's processing and what it's fixing. And then I can also scroll down here and I can see all my things, and they have scores on them right here. So I can go in and remediate right here. I can go in and remediate from the module. There's several ways to do it. So what I'm going to do is show you how to do it from inside the actual module real quick. So I have a module down here that is a demo. You see my little accessibility checker right here tells me I have a problem because it's yellow. And so it's green, yellow, or red. Red is totally inaccessible. Yellow is you have issues. Green is that you're above what the acceptable score is at your university. So I have a score. If I scroll over it, I can see I have a score of 53%. So I can open it up and view my accessibility report. Now, what's really nifty about Yuja is that it does often give you the chance to fix the issue right within whatever you're working with, but it does not always. So if you have an issue that does not have fix issue on it, it's going to tell you what you need to do, but you're going to have to go back to the original software that you used to create it, like Acrobat or Word if you made a document. So if you're missing headings, often that is something that you have to go back into Word and put your headings in, but usually will let you know you have a problem. And a lot of things it will let you fix within the system. So I'm going to click on Fix Issue, and it says table does not have a caption, and it's referring to this table right here. And I would put a caption, like a real one. For this purpose, fake table for demonstration purposes. Add fix. Then it's telling me my color contrast is not right and that this is hard to read. And so it's suggesting that I have a new font color and a new background color and that it will pass. So I'm going to hit add fix. And then it's also telling me that the default language for the HTML is not set up. So I'm going to choose English, add fix. And then it's telling me, what do I want to do? I've put all my fixes in. I want to apply them now. And so you'll see it's generating a document preview, and it's going to show me my new updated document along with my score. But I want to point this out when I tell you that it doesn't catch everything. It does catch headings usually, but this right here is not a heading, and this one is. So here is an example of when Yuja did not catch something I intentionally put in there. Now, these are alternative formats. Students are able to see if you have this toggled on, because you can toggle it off, but if you have it toggled on, this allows students to get your content or your whatever your document, HTML, that allows them to take it out in a different format. So they can do an immersive reader, and if you don't know what something is, you can scroll over it. They all have the little I for information, and it'll tell you exactly what that format is. And so you can get an immersive reader, you can download it as an audio podcast. So this gives our students multiple means of accessing the content. So I think that's a really neat part of Yuja Panorama, is that it does give other formats. So I want to next show you how Yuja works in the rich content editor. So if I open up a page in Canvas, I'm going to hit edit right here. And my normal accessibility checker turns into Yuja Panorama. This one right now already has a score report of 100, so there's no issues I need to fix, but I can remediate it right within the rich content editor. So that means that when you're creating new things in Canvas pages, that you can check them as you're creating them because it will throw up flags when you have an accessibility issue. Um, Now I want to, let's see, go and look at some of my other pages that I had in the Yuja Panorama dashboard, and I just want to work through a few of these smaller issues and show you. Now, I do want to use this as an example. This is a PDF. I can view it and I can see my accessibility report right here. I have 245 issues. If I want to look at my issues overall, I can go into more actions, view issue types, and I see that every single one of these is that the font size is smaller than 9. There's nothing I can do about that in Yuja Panorama. This is a PDF. This is how it came because it was a journal article. So this is an example of something that Yuja cannot fix. But I actually stuck this PDF that was inaccessible into Yuja. I pulled out an OCR reconstructed format and I fed it back into Canvas, and it was able to create an accessibility report because it added some headings throughout there. And the one thing that it wasn't able to do is change the font size. So on a final note, with everything I want to tell you, these things are tools. So these are going to make it easier for us to serve our students better, but everything needs a human eye on it. So it does not matter how many tools we have, we still have to go behind these things and check them. And just like I showed you the example of Yuja where it didn't catch the headings issue, well, I know a screen reader will catch that. And if I look at it, I can see that there's an issue there. So remember, you always need to put human eyes on it. And on that note, I am done.
Okay, I think that is that's the end of our presentations. So we are open for questions. Katie, did we have any questions in the Q&A?
We do have a couple. So Marie asked in the chat if she's creating a document in Google for Canvas courses, what's the preferred format to download for sheets and docs? Anybody have an answer for that?
We are not a Google campus, so
So
I'm
Google
not.
does have an accessibility checker built into it, similar to how Microsoft has it built in too. So you would want to download that as a doc. Don't save it as a PDF. There's no reason to save it as a PDF. You don't need it in there as a PDF. Documents are easier to remediate. So if you find an issue, with a Google Doc, if it was me, I would use the accessibility checker built into Google Docs, download it as a docx, upload that into Canvas, and use Yuja to check it out.
Thank you, Whitney. April asks in the Q&A, can you have more than one of the same type of heading? Example, multiple heading number 3.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course you can. So headings are about making sure that you're um, think of it like a table of contents, right? Or like bullet points. You can have multiple ones that are at the same level of the indent. They just have to be aligned correctly. So you would want to make sure that you have a heading 2, and then everything under the heading 2 that is heading 3 would show up as sort of, you can think of it as like collapsing under that. And then if you had a heading 4, that would be under heading 3. You wouldn't want to put a heading 4 directly under a heading 2. But you can have as many as each heading type as you want, except for heading 1. Heading 1 is always the big title, and there should only be one.
Thank you, Meredith. All right, Sherry asks, Spring shared LibGuides used by most academic colleges and university libraries, when embedding offsite videos or linking to a YouTube training video, how can you inform students that they must select closed captions button in order to view the captions?
I'll take a stab at this one, and I might be going the wrong way with this, but usually people who know that they need captions know how to access it within like YouTube's platform. So you could always put something when you're embedding it. Like if it's a YouTube video you embed in a Canvas page, you can click for closed captions. But usually the end user who needs that modality usually knows how to access it.
Yeah, I will just echo Whitney with you can always put something. I'm assuming you're embedding it inside of a text box of some kind, and there is a way to put text around it. And if that's true, you can always put some instructions. Click on, like, this video is embedded, click on the video to watch it. You don't need to go to an outside site in order to get closed captions, click here. In order to get audio descriptions, click here. It's never going to be a problem to have more descriptive text as long as you're making sure that it's chunked and so that the web page is easy to read, right? Because we want to keep that in mind as well.
Nicole asked, has anyone had problems with links opening in current windows when students are using web browsers other than Chrome? And that particular question prompted me to remind everyone that browsers do make a difference. Web browser recommendations do make a difference in how information is presented and what accessibility people have to that information. As a personal example, when I first started using Canvas, I started accessing it in Safari. I could not understand going back and forth with my partner faculty member why she could see things and I could not. So just a reminder, maybe not an answer to Nicole's question, but just a reminder, browsers do make a difference. So make sure that you are going with a recommended browser for the software that you're using. And your LMS coordinator and your IT people will definitely be able to give you those answers.
I will say from experience, Chrome works the best with Canvas. Canvas, I believe, says that there are a few browsers that work, and I have had various problems. I don't know if I've run into that exact one, Nicole, but I've had a few various problems that have popped up from time to time on just about every browser that is not Chrome when I was using Canvas. So I do tend to stick to Chrome if I'm absolutely certain that I need to do something that, might cause me problems.
Hey, Katie, there's one in the chat from an anonymous attendee. I was going to take a stab at that, asking about hotspot questions not being supported. That is correct. A screen reader will not read through them correctly, but they can't answer because they don't know what it's pointing to on the visual. So it's saying that it's an integral part of the NCLEX RN's licensure exam. If students are sitting for that exam in that format, how do we address it? And so I looked it up. If you're taking that exam, you can request accommodations. So in that case, there would be some reasonable accommodation where they would change that exam question somehow. And so that would be an actual accommodation request rather than an accessibility thing. And that's not a great answer. But I think that's how that would roll out if you're talking about them taking the actual exam and not having the ability to do hotspots because they're doing a screen reader. They would probably have somebody there verbally explaining the diagram and asking where it goes. it would be an accommodation.
Whitney, that was an amazing answer to a very difficult question. Thank you for taking the time to look that up.
I thanks.
All right, keep your questions coming in the chat or the Q&A. We do have just a couple of minutes left. I do want to take an opportunity in the lull of conversation to thank all of our presenters today. You guys did an amazing job as usual. But just a reminder of the phenomenal talent that we have on our campuses and how we do have availability to help connect people with resources. So if you did not find your answers today, do not hesitate to reach out to your learning management coordinator on your campus. They're amazing resources and kind, and as you can see, incredibly patient and very good at walking people step by step through things.
There's one more question, and I'm not sure exactly what this one means. Has course recycling been explored, and is this a practice helpful for compatibility? I don't know if that means like reusing old courses. I know for us here at Louisiana Tech, my recommendation, because we're on the quarter system, is they start working on spring now and then work on the summer during spring and then work on fall during summer and then work on winter when it comes back around. So we are doing a 1 year cycle in hopes that if they are reusing their courses, the next time they reuse them, it is done. So once we get them there, but I don't know if that's what you mean by course recycling.
The other thing that I'll add on that note is that we are looking for more options and opportunities to share information across campuses, including designed courses. If there are some really excellently designed courses and accessible courses across system, maybe there's not the need to reinvent those courses on every campus. And so those options will also be looked at in the future. So just know that the people that you've been chatting with in the chat may be your next partner in crime when it comes to designing courses that both you can use at your institution and they can use at theirs. So some exciting things to come, I think, as far as collaboration and thinking about how we share workload. All right, everyone.
I see a question in
Yeah.
the Q&A about accessible PDFs. That was the first webinar that we did. I believe that we've already put a link in the chat, but I think Katie could put another one in there probably to our previous webinars. The first one was on all things files, documents, those sorts of things. So Word, PDFs, anything that you'd want to know about that. And our second one was about accessible media. All of those topics really needed the space, so we wanted to break it up into 3 different webinars so that we were not trying to rush all that information because it is important. So that is available to you.
Alyssa and I both just added it for you. Alyssa had added it up at the top, but to prevent some scrolling, you've got it twice. And not to worry, we will be sending it out again, probably ad nauseum, maybe 2 to 3 times before you leave for the holidays. We do have one question that I am not sure that our panelists will be able to answer. But the question is from Sherry, and she says, we use Board Vitals as a preparatory tool for the NCLEX nursing board examination. It does not have closed captions. So how should we address this?
I think for something like that, you need to go back to the vendor because that's not something that any of us can get into and fix. She'd have to, I think she needs a conversation with the vendor about that.
And we are having conversations across system and with our system attorneys to talk through what our options are when it comes to contracts that we may already have established. But if there is an issue in helping us meet accessibility, where do we go from there? And we don't have answers on that just yet, but we are asking those questions. So know if that is your situation, please elevate that on your campus and we will work to help provide guidance. All right, everyone. Right on time. Thank you so much to our two ASL interpreters. We very much appreciate y'all. We appreciate our panelists. And of course, we appreciate you, faculty and staff across system. You are going to be the reason that we are going to be compliant because accessibility is everybody's responsibility. And we thank you for taking it seriously. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we will see you after those holidays.